Is sports going to be the next big streaming differentiator or the big streaming differentiator?
No, I think the reality is all of these streaming platforms are realizing just how difficult it is, not just to attract subscribers, but to re-engage them and to make sure they don't churn, Emily. And it's hard, right? There's a reason why Netflix spends $17 billion a year on content. It's not like they do it because they want to spend too much money and they just toss and burn capital. The reality is the difference between the old cable days that you and I grew up on. Remember, you wanted to cancel your cable service, like you had to literally call up Comcast or back in the day, Time Warner Cable. You probably spent the better part of your day on hold being transferred around to departments. If you actually got through the retention department and tried to quit or cancel, then you had to go return your equipment and stand in line. Like it was being tortured. Now, if you want to cancel a service, it's point and click and cancel, and you can sign right back up a few days later. So I think in many ways, sports is being used as a tool that all of these companies are looking at to bring in new subscribers and to retain existing subscribers. And I don't think any of these will be all sports. I think that's a very hard business model. And I think it's one of the reasons ESPN hasn't converted to over the top yet. But I do think that they're all looking at sports as yet another tool to drive subscribers and retain existing ones.
How big a deal is Apple picking up Major League Soccer or Disney losing out on cricket? Do you see these wins and losses as, more, not necessarily big deals?
I think Apple is a huge deal. I think every single person that invests and looks at the media space or runs a media company should be thinking about what Apple is doing, because the only thing holding the traditional media bundle, big video bundles, cable and broadcast networks, the only thing holding these bundles together, Emily, is sports. All the best entertainment programming. Think about it. Name one big show, new show, that's aired on linear TV in years. Like everything is now starting its life on streaming. I don't care whether we're talking about Squid Games, which you just talked about, or Mandalorian on Disney, or Murderers in the Building on Hulu. Like everything is happening on streaming. So the only thing sort of left has been sports. And yet, look what just happened. Amazon has just taken the #2 TV series on linear TV, broadcast TV, in Thursday Night Football this fall only on Amazon Prime. And then you see this deal with MLS today. Like you're just every day, the last pieces that are holding together the TV bundle are being stripped away. And that means two things. One, more and more cord cutting, less and less viewership for these TV programs. And all of that means, the bottom line is that these legacy media companies are facing more and more pressure because most of them are built around broadcast and cable networks. It's going to be very hard.
How much M&A do you think we're going to see? I know you don't think a Netflix Roku deal is going to happen. Would you say there's a 0% chance?
Look, I hate zeros. I've learned never to. I've learned never to say never. I mean, I think if we had been on here if you said 8 weeks ago, is Netflix going to do advertising? I would have said there's no chance. So you should never say never. Everything is up for debate. I think the odds of Netflix buying Roku are very hard to imagine. Why would you want to be in the device business? I think Netflix benefits from being available on every device and not competing. Buying Roku would put them into battling against companies like Samsung and Vizio, and that's just very hard for me to believe. And I think Netflix is very focused on sort of an asset-light approach initially to advertising, outsourcing. There was a story out today that they may be doing, this is the information reported, they may be looking at using Comcast's Freewheel product. We think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And look, they're going to connect into lots of platforms and use lots of players. They'll work with Roku's, they'll work with Trade Desks, but I'd be very surprised if Netflix was going to go out and make a very significant acquisition. That's just not their style at all.
They are turning this Squid Game success into a reality competition. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is right now is now culturally the right time for a competition like this?
With the world melting down, if you watch Squid Games, the sort of the depressive nature of the world, it sort of feels like the right time for a Squid Game reality series, to be honest. But leave that aside, I think you're bringing up a greater issue. Netflix isn't broken. None of the streaming services are broken per se. The reality is it's all about content. Consumers are going to gravitate to the services where they spend the most time and where they have the most content that keeps them entertained. And the reality is Netflix still is by far and away the biggest service. 25% of all time spent on connected TVs is on Netflix. but I do think they need more iconic shows. And Stranger Things has been huge coming back. All 4 seasons were the top 4 most watched shows on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. So there's no doubt that franchise zeitgeist content is critical. And I think that's why you're seeing Netflix lean into doing more, not just a second season of Squid Games, but how can they build this franchise even broader? I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're going to see Netflix pivot from having, instead of just volume of series, really making sure that they have a good number of series that really are zeitgeisty and really water cooler conversation that create the buzz that they need. Because I think they haven't had enough of that. And that's part of the reason why they've suffered over the course of the last couple of quarters.
We've seen a few Disney stories over the last week, more sort of Game of Thrones, Chapek firing Peter Rice, his head of content. Apparently it only took 7 minutes. How optimistic right now are you about Chapek's leadership and the culture he is trying to create, given the challenges that he's faced?
Look, Chapek came in at a very hard time, right in the middle of the pandemic. Was no easy task. The theme park business was just, he was very much behind before he became CEO. He's obviously having an incredible resurgence. They literally can't keep up with demand and they're raising price. But I think the real question for Chapek is, what is his plan? Is ESPN and sports the future? Clearly, they just bowed out of sports on streaming in India, as you brought up. The IPL rights went to Viacom 18, which is owned by Reliance Jio and James Murdoch and others. But certainly bowing out of digital or streaming in India is a big deal, and it sort of points to this larger existential question for Chapek of what is the future of Disney? Is it about Disney Studios, meaning the film studio and the TV studio, the theme parks and consumer product, which all really work well together? Do they need to be in the ABC broadcast TV business? Do they need to be in the ESPN and FX business? I think there's some very big decisions for Chapek, and I think we're all waiting. I mean, the reality is there a future for Hulu, or do they just put more and more of that content onto Disney Plus? There are some really big structural decisions. Maybe that's what the board is waiting for, to sort of see what Disney ultimately looks like. I will say I was surprised the board came out with a comment sort of endorsing Chapek, but didn't just renew his contract. His contract expires in February 2023. I'm not sure what they're waiting for. Either renew his contract or tell us they're bringing in a new CEO. It does seem strange that we're sort of sitting here waiting to figure out what happens next. The stocks obviously suffered, but the whole group is down substantially. I think investors really want to know, what is the structural future of Disney? What are the assets that are they keeping? What assets are they getting rid of? And we really haven't gotten that sense from Disney over the last 6 months.